Hi there. It's me, Teddy Ruxpin. It's the kind of day that some people might not like very much.
Top 30 Toys from the 1980s you wished you still had. What if I told you that some of your favorite childhood toys from the 1980s are now worth more than a brand new car? In the next few minutes, I'll reveal how a simple plastic doll sparked violent riots in toy stores across America, show you which forgotten 80s toy recently sold for an eye-watering $6,000, and uncover the shocking reason why certain vintage toys from your childhood could be sitting on a goldmine. But first, let me tell you about a rare Transformers figure that Pepsi created, and why finding one today is driving collectors absolutely crazy.
And the Earth is no match for the evil Decepticons. Led by Megatron's hunger for power, they will destroy anything in their way. Disguised as Earth vehicles, Optimus Prime and
Transformers action figures.
Well, all right!
These robots in disguise were engineering marvels that clicked, snapped, and transformed with that distinctive plastic-on-plastic sound. The die-cast metal parts had this unique metallic smell, and the painted details felt slightly raised under your fingertips. Each figure had that perfect weight, heavy enough to feel substantial, but light enough to whoosh through the air. My Optimus Prime had more battle scars from epic battle, falling down the stairs, than actual transformations. Once I spent 3 hours trying to transform my Soundwave back into a cassette player, only to discover I'd been following the instructions upside down. My mom still brings up the time she vacuumed up Bumblebee's arm, and the vacuum cleaner made transformer noises for a week.
Ask and you shall receive.
Hey, check this out. Back in '85, Pepsi made a special Optimus Prime that you could only get by collecting Pepsi bottle caps and mailing them in. It cost $24. These days, collectors go absolutely crazy trying to find one of these rare promotional toys.
The original line eventually lost its shine when cheaper materials replaced the die-cast metal parts, and newer versions couldn't match the solid, satisfying feel of those first-generation figures.
Fly for me, just for me, skydancers dance for me. Wow, they really fly! Come to me, dance for me, skydancers fly for me. They're beautiful.
Sky dancers were every 80s kid's magical escape. Those gorgeous winged ballerinas that would soar toward the ceiling with just one pull of their string. The plastic wings had this shimmer that caught the light just right, making rainbow patterns dance across your bedroom walls. When you pulled the string, it made this thrilling whirring sound that meant something amazing was about to happen. My biggest sky dancer disaster happened during my cousin's birthday party when I launched mine in the dining room. It flew straight into my aunt's perfectly styled hair and got so tangled we had to cut both the doll and a chunk of her hair out. I was banned from indoor launches after that, but I swear my aunt's hairstyle actually looked better with that impromptu layered cut. These aerial ballerinas were officially grounded in 2000 when they were recalled after a staggering string of injuries. We're talking about 150 reported.
Hit that subscribe button to join American Vintage Tales. Let us know in comments what was your favorite toy from 1980s.
Sweetie, I'm home!
Mr. Potato Head stood proud as the original gangster of mix-and-match toys, with that distinct rubbery potato smell and slightly tacky plastic feel. His parts had this satisfying pop when you stuck them in, and that hollow body made the perfect secret storage spot for forbidden treasures like cookie crumbs and small change. My greatest Mr. Potato Head moment was when I decided he needed a bath in the kitchen sink and discovered he could float, until he filled up with water and sank like the Titanic. Even better was the time I stored my pet hamster's food inside him, only to find out he'd become a late-night snack bar for the enterprising rodent. The original version lost its appeal when electronic toys took over, though honestly, it might have had something to do with all those lost pieces that parents kept stepping on at 3 a.m. Talking about all those 80s classics, we can't forget the most powerful man in the universe.
The Masters of the Universe collection. 23 pieces, each sold separately. There's He-Man and these heroic action figures.
He-Man figures were absolute beasts.
He-Man was a pretty badass dude.
Twice the size of regular action figures with that unique rubbery muscle texture and that unmistakable plasticky vanilla-like scent. Every figure had this incredible heft to it, and that battle-ready stance with the power twist waist action that made that satisfying clicking sound when you turned it. I spent hours making He-Man and Skeletor duke it out in epic battles on my bed, which became Castle Grayskull thanks to some strategically placed pillows. My greatest triumph turned into instant tragedy when I decided He-Man needed to be more realistic and colored his blonde hair with Mom's permanent marker. Turns out, permanent really means permanent. Even better was the time I tried to recreate the power sword using aluminum foil and got it stuck in the VCR. The original line eventually faded when more articulated action figures hit the market.
So, how much do you want for it?
$1,000.
And the simple twist and punch play pattern couldn't compete with the complexity of newer toys. Speaking of muscular heroes, nothing roared into the 80s quite like Thundercats.
The Thundercats are here!
Those action figures had this unique metallic sheen to their paint that caught the light just right, and their weapons had that satisfying metallic clink when they connected. Each figure came with this distinct new toy smell that was somehow both plasticky and exotic, like space cats should smell. And their furry details were actually textured. You could feel every stripe on Tigra's arms. The most epic fail of my Thundercats career was trying to make Lion-O's Sword of Omens light up for real by shoving a tiny flashlight inside. Let's just say plastic and hot batteries don't mix well. Then there was that time I convinced my younger brother that if he said, "Thunder, thunder, Thundercats, ho," enough times in the bathtub, he'd turn into a Thundercat. Mom wasn't thrilled about the 45-minute bathroom occupation that followed. These amazing figures eventually disappeared from toy shelves when production costs got too high for all those detailed paint jobs and accessories, and newer action figures with more sophisticated features started dominating the market. Continuing our journey through 80s nostalgia, G.I. Joe figures had this incredible level of detail that made every tiny accessory feel like military-grade equipment. Those miniature weapons had that distinct olive green plastic smell, and the uniforms had textures you could feel with your fingertip. The rubber band holding their bodies together gave them this unique flexibility that no other action figure had, and each character came with that irresistible file card on the back. I once staged an elaborate rescue mission in our backyard, only to forget about half my Joe team buried in my mom's garden. 6 months later, Dad's tiller uncovered what he thought was a tiny zombie apocalypse of mud-covered soldiers. The best part was when my Snake Eyes figure got stuck in the air conditioning vent, and for months, we could hear him rattling around like a tiny ninja in the ductwork.
And hey, guess what? That massive USS Flag aircraft carrier from G.I. Joe back in '85 has become a total collector's dream. People today are shelling out nearly $6,000 just to get their hands on one.
These tough guys started disappearing from shelves when parents began favoring less military-themed toys, and the complexity of all those tiny accessories became a hard sell. Speaking of beloved 80s toys that captured our hearts, the Cabbage Patch Kids phenomenon was something else entirely.
Newborn clothes, I chose her with my heart, my tiny newborn, my tiny newborn. I'll turn her.
These pudgy-faced dolls with their signature vinyl heads and soft cloth bodies came with their own adoption papers and that unmistakable baby powder scent. Each one was supposedly unique, with different combinations of yarn hair, eye colors, and dimpled smiles. And they had this peculiar new doll smell mixed with a cotton-fresh scent that lingered for months. I still remember the absolute chaos at our local toy store when a new shipment arrived. My mom actually got into a tug-of-war with another parent over a blonde, pigtailed one I desperately wanted. The best part was when my uncle, trying to be helpful, washed mine in the washing machine. That poor doll's hair turned into something that looked like a bird's nest after a hurricane.
To get through the holidays without hearing from us about the Cabbage Patch dolls? Wrong.
The Cabbage Patch Kids craze was one of the 80s biggest cultural phenomenon.
My doll's birth certificate ended up more treasured than my own.
You won't believe this. During the Cabbage Patch Kids craze, a store manager at Zayre's in Wilkes-Barre got his leg broken in a stampede. And get this, even though Coleco made 3 million dolls that year, they were nowhere close to meeting the crazy demand of over 16 million orders.
The craze eventually died down when the market became saturated with knockoffs, and kids started moving on to more high-tech toys. The original charm of adopting a one-of-a-kind doll lost its magic when they became too mass-produced.
His name is Teddy Ruxpin. He talks, he tells stories.
That lovable animatronic bear. Teddy Ruxpin was the must-have toy of 1985, with his soft tan fur and signature red vest that felt like your grandma's knitted sweater. His plastic eyes had this warm, friendly glow, and when you popped in those special cassette tapes, there was this subtle whirring sound before his mouth started moving in sync with the stories. The whole thing had that classic 80s plastic smell, mixed with a hint of fabric softener from constant washing. I remember begging my parents for one after seeing him at my friend Tommy's house. When I finally got him for Christmas, I was so excited that I played the same story for 6 hours straight until my dad mysteriously lost that particular tape. The funniest part was when the batteries started dying. Poor Teddy started telling stories in slow motion, sounding like he'd had too much cough syrup. My sister used to hide behind the couch whenever his eyes moved. Teddy eventually faded from stores when cheaper electronic toys flooded the market, and those specialty cassettes became harder to maintain and replace. The complex mechanics made him too expensive to keep producing compared to simpler talking toys.
Starring Nat Nurse, Windy Winston.
Garbage Pail Kids. These delightfully disgusting trading cards were the ultimate rebellion against the Cabbage Patch craze. Each card had this distinct bubblegum smell mixed with that waxy trading card scent, and that slightly textured surface felt almost powdery under your fingers. The glossy surface had this perfect smoothness until you peeled off the sticker, which everyone did, much to their parents' horror. My proudest moment was wallpapering my entire bedroom door with GPK stickers, only to discover that summer heat made them all melt into one giant, grotesque collage. Mom was thrilled. Then there was the time I traded my entire collection for what I thought was a rare card, only to find out it was a badly drawn copy made with markers. The bubblegum that came with them was like chewing on sweet concrete. These gross-out treasures eventually got banned from so many schools that they lost their playground currency value, and parent groups finally succeeded in their crusade against these delightfully disgusting collectibles.
Big blue real mean driving machine, Bigfoot.
You take Phil, I'll take...
The Power Wheel Bigfoot monster truck was the ultimate 80s dream machine that cost a whopping $400, about $1,000 today, making it one of the most expensive toys of the decade. With its working headlights, realistic engine sounds, 2-speed transmission, and official Bigfoot graphics, it was the king of backyard status symbols that every kid dreamed about after seeing it in the Sears catalog. Due to its astronomical price and limited production run, less than 1% of kids actually owned one, turning it into a playground legend where everyone claimed they knew someone who had it, but almost nobody had ever seen one in real life.
Micro Machines. Dramatically detailed, stupendously styled, smaller than a nut.
Micro Machines. While kids were getting grossed out by Garbage Pail, Micro Machines were proving that good things come in tiny packages. These incredibly detailed miniatures had this perfect weight-to-size ratio and that classic die-cast metal smell. Each vehicle was so small you could feel every tiny detail with your fingertip, like reading automotive braille. My greatest Micro Machine disaster involved creating an elaborate city on my mom's antique dining table, using her best tablecloth as a landscape. Everything was perfect until dinner time when we discovered tiny tire marks permanently embedded in the lace. Even better was the time I convinced my little sister that if she swallowed one, she'd become a transformer. Mom wasn't too happy about that emergency room visit. The original line eventually hit the brakes when cheaper, less detailed competitors flooded the market, and the incredible craftsmanship became too expensive to maintain at their micro price point. Power Wheels brought every kid's driving dreams to life with that unmistakable whirring motor sound. The hard plastic seat had this unique new car smell mixed with backyard dirt, and those chunky pedals made this satisfying click when you pushed them down. The steering wheel had that perfect smooth texture that got delightfully sticky in the summer heat. My most epic Power Wheels moment was when I convinced the neighborhood kids I was starting a taxi service. Business was booming until I ran out of battery halfway through Mrs. Thompson's grocery delivery run. Even better was the time I tried to take my cat for a ride and ended up chasing her around the yard in reverse because I couldn't figure out how to change gears. Dad still has video evidence of that adventure. These battery-powered beauties became less popular when their prices kept rising, and parents realized that replacing those massive batteries cost almost as much as a real car payment. GoBots rolled into our lives like Transformers' quirky cousins. They had this unique metallic feel that was lighter than Transformers, with that distinctive clicking sound when you transformed them. The die-cast metal parts had this cool, smooth texture, and they always smelled like a mix of new toys and penny candy. My proudest GoBot moment was bringing Leader 1 to show and tell, confidently announcing it was a Transformer until the class know-it-all started a heated robot identity debate that ended in timeout for both of us. I once left Psykill in my pocket through the wash. He came out clean but permanently stuck in some bizarre half-car, half-robot configuration that made him look like he'd had too much robot coffee. These mechanical underdogs eventually lost the robot wars to the Transformers' superior marketing and complexity, becoming the forgotten soldiers of the toy robot revolution.
Koosh it! Don't just smash it!
Koosh it!
Kooshball. Those wild rubber strands bouncing in every direction were like holding a tiny firework in your hand. Each Koosh had this distinct rubbery smell that lingered on your fingers, and those hundreds of little tentacles felt like soft, springy worms dancing across your palm. The original ones had this perfect weight, heavy enough to throw, but light enough to catch without getting smacked too hard. My most memorable Koosh catastrophe happened during a quiet moment in church when I thought it would make a perfect silent toy. One enthusiastic squeeze sent it flying 3 pews ahead, where it landed perfectly in Mrs. Johnson's beehive hairdo. The rescue mission that followed involved 3 adults, 2 hymnals, and 1 very patient Mrs. Johnson. Even worse was when my cat decided it was her new favorite toy, and I woke up with Koosh strands scattered across the house like rubber spaghetti. These bouncy beauties eventually lost their appeal when the rubber strands started getting cheaper and more brittle, and parents got tired of finding broken Koosh tentacles everywhere.
My little pony, all in a twinkling, spring is here.
My Little Pony galloped into every 80s kid's heart with those impossibly soft manes and tails. Each pony had this sweet, almost fruity scent that somehow lasted for years, and their bodies were made of this smooth, velvety plastic that felt cool to the touch. The best part was the slight sparkle in their cymbals that caught the light just right, and those brushable manes that felt like real silk between your fingers. My most infamous pony moment was trying to give my favorite purple pony Twilight a spa day with my mom's expensive hair conditioner. Turns out leaving it on overnight created something that looked less like a pony and more like a petrified cotton candy explosion. Even better was the time I convinced my brother that if he brushed their tails 100 times before bed, they'd come alive at midnight. He actually set an alarm to check. The original ponies trotted off into the sunset when cheaper materials couldn't match the quality of those first generations. And the rising cost of that premium pony hair made production too expensive to maintain.
Madballs, gross for one, gross for...
Madballs, these grotesque rubber spheres with faces that would make a monster proud. Each ball had this unique rubbery texture and that weird new ball smell that was somewhere between a tennis ball and bubblegum. They were disgustingly squishy to touch, with all those bumps and warts you could feel under your fingers. My crowning Madball moment was bringing Screamin' Mimi to picture day at school, convinced it would make a great prop. The photographer wasn't amused when I squeezed it too hard and it went flying, knocking over his light stand. Even better was the time I tried to clean mine in the dishwasher. Turns out, hot water makes them expand like something from a horror movie. These gross-out toys eventually bounced out of popularity when parents decided they were too disturbing, and newer, less grotesque fidget toys took their place. Speaking of 80s tech,
Oh, did I scare you? Oh, I do that so well. If you take us home, we'll kiss your Aunt Martha.
Bogglins were the grotesque rubber puppets your mom hated, but couldn't technically ban because they were educational hand puppets. These squishy, warty creatures with bulging eyes and movable faces were magnificently disgusting. The rubber had this unique smell that was somewhere between a new shower curtain and yesterday's gym socks, absolutely perfect for their character. The genius of Bogglins was in their design. Those rolling eyes and flexible faces could express everything from mild disgust to absolute horror. My Boggling, which I named Crud, was my partner in backyard monster movies until that fateful summer day when I left him on the patio. The sun turned him into abstract art, his face permanently frozen in what looked like a mix of surprise and melting ice cream. Even warped, he kept his place of honor on my shelf, though his new permanent expression did give my little sister nightmares. While these rubber monsters had their moment in the late 80s, they eventually disappeared from toy stores, leaving behind a legacy of perfectly grotesque memories.
What's inside these colorful new Keypers?
Keepers, what's inside those?
Keypers were those mysterious little treasure boxes that turned everyday kids into mini hoarders. These plastic containers came in every color imaginable, and were just the right size to store your most precious collectibles, from lucky pennies to that special rock you found that one time that might have been a dinosaur egg. The satisfying snap of the lid closing was like a tiny vault sealing away your secrets. My prized purple Keyper housed my emergency stash, a rubber band ball, 3 marbles, and a magic penny that I was convinced brought me luck on spelling tests. The real drama started when my collection grew so large that finding anything became an archaeological expedition. Mom would step on them in the middle of the night, unleashing a rainbow avalanche of childhood treasures across the floor. While they vanished from store shelves by the early 90s, these little boxes taught us the valuable life skill of organizing our stuff, even if most of us just used them to hide candy from our siblings.
But look! Spell says S-A-Y-S.
Speak and Spell was that robotic teacher who sounded like it learned English from a dial-up modem. That chunky red device with its calculator-style display and mono-speaker voice was Texas Instruments' way of making education feel like you were communicating with an alien. The voice had this unique way of breaking words into bizarre syllables that made cat sound like it had 17 letters. My most memorable moment was when it started glitching during a family road trip, randomly announcing misspelled words at 3 a.m. and nearly causing my dad to drive off the road. The keyboard made this satisfying crunchy sound with each press, though hitting the keys too hard would make the screen look like a disco party. Parents loved it because it was educational, but we kids knew the real fun was in making it say the most complicated words we could find, just to hear its electronic voice struggle. When the batteries started dying, it would transform into something that sounded like a possessed dictionary, stretching words out like haunted taffy.
Top. Each baby-sized troll has a secret hidden jewel, and each jewel with its special sparkle is perfect for wishing on.
Troll dolls were those wild-haired plastic gremlins that somehow became a cultural phenomenon. Standing barely 3 inches tall, with jeweled belly buttons and hair that defied both gravity and good taste, these little creatures multiplied faster than actual trolls. The hair was irresistible. It stood straight up like they'd just stuck their fingers in an electrical socket, and came in colors that made rainbow sherbet look dull. My collection started with one lucky troll for a math test and somehow exploded into an army that took over my entire desk. The real tragedy struck during a well-intentioned haircut attempt that left my favorite troll looking like it had survived a hedge trimmer accident. Schools eventually banned them for being distracting, though how anyone could concentrate with 30 pairs of googly eyes staring at them anyway was beyond me. The original trolls from the 60s made a comeback every decade or so, each time with new gimmicks. But nothing beat the simple charm of those original plastic weirdos with their gem belly buttons and judgy little eyes. Power Glove was Nintendo's attempt to make us feel like we were living in the future, but ended up making us feel like we were trying to play games while wearing an oven mitt made of plastic and dreams. That metallic gray gauntlet with its array of buttons and flex sensors looked like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. Programming it involved punching in codes that felt more like launching nuclear missiles than playing Super Mario Bros. My proudest Power Glove moment was accidentally punching a hole in the living room ceiling during an especially enthusiastic round of Punch-Out. Turns out Power wasn't just part of the name. The controller was so temperamental that getting it to register basic movements was like trying to teach interpretive dance to a brick wall. Still, we all pretended it worked perfectly because wearing it made us feel like cyborg warriors from the future, even if we were secretly using the D-pad controls on the wrist. By 1991, it had vanished from stores, leaving behind a legacy of frustrated gamers and dented ceiling tiles. Play tents were those magical fortresses that transformed any boring corner into an instant adventure zone. Whether it was the classic A-frame design or those tunnel-style mazes, these cloth castles could turn your living room into a secret agent headquarters or a princess palace in seconds. The poles always made this specific squeaking sound when you set them up, the universal signal that something awesome was about to happen. My tent's greatest moment was during a week-long camping trip in the basement where I convinced my parents to let me sleep in it until that mysterious midnight crash turned out to be my cat getting tangled in the support strings. The best ones had those little mesh windows that made perfect spy holes for monitoring suspicious sibling activity. While they were meant to be temporary, most kids turned them into semi-permanent room fixtures until they either collapsed from overuse or mysteriously disappeared during spring cleaning. Modern kids might have their elaborate playhouses, but nothing beat the versatility of a simple play tent that could be anything from a moon base to a dragon's cave. Manglors was a toy made by Ideal in 1984. The company tried to sell the toy by saying it could be destroyed for a short time. You can pull them, squish them, and take them apart. They'll go back to how they looked before, almost like new. But sneaking in the word almost in their ad didn't stop Manglors from being called one of the worst Christmas toys that year by the Ada Consumer Panel. Manglors were also said to be one of the messiest toys, just like Baby Alive, a doll that often pooped itself. The big idea behind Manglors was that kids could not only rip the toy's arms and legs off, but also put them back on. Sadly, children soon found out that putting the toy back together was nearly impossible. The sticky stuff that was supposed to hold the toy together only worked for a few seconds after the toy was taken apart. Most of the time, kids were left in tears with a bunch of separated arms, legs, and bodies, and no way to put the pieces back together like Frankenstein's monster.
Cross the stars to save the universe from the monster minds. Jace searches for his father to unite them.
We have Wheeled Warriors. This toy line was based on a cartoon called Jason of the Wheeled Warriors, which first showed on a French TV channel called TF1 and later came to the US on different channels. Even though the cartoon had a full 65 episodes, the toys weren't as successful, with only 13 items made. The vehicles were strong and easy to put together, but the company made a big mistake when they made the toys. Instead of including the main character Jace with the toys, they put in a bunch of generic figures called the Lightning League and Monster Minds Brain figures. If they had included the characters from the cartoon, Wheeled Warriors would have been more popular with kids who liked playing with vehicle toys.
Quick, launch the Ring Raiders! When you've got the Ring Raiders ready for...
Ring Raiders. These were tiny planes that you wore on your finger with a ring attached. Then you kind of, I guess, move your hand around in the air while running around like a crazy kid on a sugar high. If you didn't have much of an imagination, Matchbox sold the blaster, a joystick that made sounds, and the Skull Squadron base, which let you launch your planes. It's no surprise that the Ring Raiders also had their own cartoon series. It started with a 2-hour special made by Deke Enterprises, followed by 5 more 30-minute episodes. The series takes place in the far future of 1998 and follows the evil Skull Squadron, who want to take over the world, of course. Oh, and did I mention their planes can travel through time? Because they can. And since this is an 80s cartoon trying to sell toys to kids, there has to be a group of good guys to fight the bad Skull Squadron. The creators came up with the super amazing, exciting, and totally original name Justice Crew. Had enough? Yeah, so did the kids back in the 80s.
With a breakthrough in space technology, Power Deploy. It activates Starcom equipment. Transports Starcom combat troops.
Starcom, a space-themed toy line with magnetic action figures and vehicles that kids could play with together. Once again, we have a toy line that was advertised with a short-lived cartoon series called Starcom, the U.S. Space Force, also made by Deke Enterprises. Just like many others, Starcom had a hard time finding success in the crowded toy market of the 1980s. Apart from having magnetic parts, which let figures stand on their vehicles, there was also a special feature called Power Deploy that would change the vehicles and open up different parts. These interactive features were a big plus for the toy line, and one of the main reasons people bought them. The cartoon series was like so many others at the time, with good guys fighting bad guys. This time, the bad guys were the Shadow Force, led by Emperor Dark. Yeah, they really called him Emperor Dark. And they fought against the good guys, the Starcom Astro Marines. People say that Starcom's failure was one of the reasons Coleco went bankrupt and had to be sold to Mattel. Even though Starcom didn't last long in America, it did well in Europe until 1990, making it maybe one of the most popular toys we've talked about today. That iconic blue and silver Walkman was every kid's gateway to audio freedom. The smooth metallic body had this cool-to-the-touch feel, and everyone remembers that satisfying mechanical click of the play button. There was something magical about that new electronic smell mixed with the scent of fresh foam headphone covers, and the way the buttons developed that perfect worn shine from constant use. I thought I was the coolest kid in school until my cassette of Eye of the Tiger got eaten during gym class. The whole class watched as I frantically tried to save it with a pencil, only to create the world's first cassette tape modern art sculpture. Even better was when I convinced my little brother that the rewind button could also rewind real life. He spent a whole day pressing it trying to undo his math test. The Walkman eventually faded when digital music took over. Nintendo Zapper, that sleek gray light gun that made every kid feel like a digital sharpshooter. The plastic had this unique matte finish that felt almost velvety, and that trigger click was so crisp and satisfying. Everyone remembers that distinct Nintendo plastic smell and the way the cord always seemed to coil up no matter how much you tried to straighten it.
Fuzzy pets, it's true. Wash the little puppies and brush them too. Polly Pocket.
Polly Pocket was every 80s kid's secret treasure. Those gorgeous pastel-colored compacts that opened up to reveal entire miniature worlds. The plastic had this distinct sweet smell, like candy mixed with new shoes. And those tiny dolls were so small, you could feel every microscopic detail under your fingertip. The cases had this satisfying snap when they closed, like a fancy makeup compact. My greatest Polly tragedy happened during show and tell when I accidentally dropped my favorite heart-shaped compact down the school drinking fountain. In my brilliant rescue attempt, I convinced my best friend to stick her hand in the drain. She got stuck, the fire department came, and Polly was never seen again. I swore I could hear tiny splashing sounds from that fountain for weeks after. These tiny treasures eventually disappeared when safety regulations about small parts became stricter, and parents got tired of finding miniature Pollys were in the vacuum cleaner and under their feet. While girls treasured their Pollys, others fell for sky dancers.
Every home more desirable. Trivial Pursuit.
Trivial Pursuit was the board game that turned every family gathering into an intellectual battleground. The game had this distinct cardboard and ink smell, with those plastic pie pieces that made the most satisfying click when you wedged them into your player wheel. The cards had this smooth, almost waxy feel, and everyone remembers that familiar rustle as you pulled a fresh card from the box. My family's most legendary game ended when my dad, a history teacher, lost to my 12-year-old cousin who guessed Abraham Lincoln for every history question and somehow got 3 of them right. Then there was the time my uncle was so convinced an answer was wrong, he drove to the library at 9 p.m. to prove his point, only to return an hour later, sheepishly admitting the card was correct. The original version's popularity waned when people realized they'd memorized most of the answers, and the internet made random trivia knowledge less impressive than it was in those pre-Google days.
Working lights, detailed design, and 4-wheel drive.
Stompers, those mini motorized 4x4 trucks that could climb practically anything. Each vehicle had this amazing rubber tire smell mixed with that electric motor scent that only toy cars seem to have. The tires felt perfectly grippy, and the weight of those chunky batteries gave them this satisfying heft that made every crash feel epic. My greatest stomper moment was setting up an elaborate obstacle course on my mom's prized coffee table, convinced my truck could climb Mount Encyclopedia Britannica. Everything was going great until my stomper decided to take a detour right into Mom's coffee cup. Turns out these little beasts could submarine about as well as they could climb. Then there was the time I tried to turn our hamster into a stomper driver using my sister's doll clothes. The hamster had other plans. These tough little trucks eventually ground to a halt when cheaper remote control cars flooded the market, and the cost of constantly replacing those power-hungry batteries made parents think twice about buying them. From roaring stompers to battlefield, some of these 20 popular toys from the 1980s became timeless classics, while others mysteriously disappeared from shelves. But each one helped define childhood for an entire generation. And hey, if this blast from the past got you feeling nostalgic, stick around. We've got more totally awesome tales from your favorite decade coming up. Hit that subscribe button to join American Vintage Tales on our next radical adventure through time. Stay tuned, because next week we're diving into something even more incredible. And trust me, it'll be totally worth it.